Hey folks, it's Fitz with Pixels and Pills at Digital Pharma East in Philly 2012. We're at day 3, which is committed to mobile, and it was spearheaded by a terrific keynote by Mark Baker, who is Chief Development Officer with HipCricket. It was essentially on mobile responsive design 101. Can you give us a little overview?
Sure. So responsive design basically is the concept, or it's billed as this idea that you create one website one time and it'll render properly on all different devices. It's kind of a future-proof methodology. And so we've just basically kind of going through, well, what is responsive design really? How does it actually work? What are the pitfalls? What do you need to look out for? And what does it really mean as far as being a long-term strategy?
When I think about responsive design, what fascinates me is exactly to your point, which is taking a look not as a desktop application, not as a tablet app, but it's all really one and the same thing. And what's happened over the course of the few years is really redefining the expectations of the user about what the user experience is all like. And to me, what I found in the digital health space, it's simplified stuff, simplified navigation, simplified calls to action. The old days of the Yahoo portal with hundreds of links leading you where you need to go. Right now, you go to anything from a banking site to even a brand.com for pharma, and there's 1, 2, 3 primary calls to action. A dozen channel choices is shifted into only 2 or 3. And in ways, it's kind of reflective of where folks are. We don't have time to dig into a 40-page website, and we're really on the move and we're on the go. How has that ultimately impacted what you do, and where do you see all this thing headed?
Well, I tell you, it's the way we like to say it is that mobile users are hunters, not browsers. So when you're on your mobile device, you're searching for something. You're looking for a piece of content. You want to, just get to the facts. Give me exactly what I'm looking for right now. Don't waste my time. And we're kind of seeing that, well, if you work through that and you start building your websites thinking of just what is important and let me build on a small device, and then you start progressively enhancing that for larger and larger devices, you end up with content that is more useful to the end user, and you're not spending a lot of time providing a lot of fluff. And so overall it's evolving into kind of a different way of thinking, and therefore increasing the quality of the output.
I think so, too. You're really cutting to the chase, so there's less fluff and more action. We've got a lot of constituents, especially here in the pharmaceutical and device field. And their primary concern, especially for branded communication, is sufficient fair balance. And with that comes a lot of extra content, which is, in a sense, the opposite of what we're really trying to get at with mobile responsive design and optimization. How do you reconcile that for the pharma medical device client that has to kind of juggle between content they know they have to share and content that really works best to share?
Right. Well, that's always a challenge, right? I mean, the fine print takes away what the big print delivers. So, how are you going to do it? And the fair and balanced considerations have been interpreted differently by the legal teams at each pharmaceutical company, right? So, sometimes we're going to make sure that a third of the screen always shows ISI information, or maybe it's how PDFs are presented, or one thing or another. And it seems like every legal team, every MLR review group finally comes up with we like this, we're okay with this one specific way of doing it. And so, for the conceivable future, we go through that path and you use the same techniques for any legal information display. Taking it to the next step of saying, well, now what content does the end user care about? Well, that's actually a more difficult project, because that's a research project. That's looking through all of the data you've been collecting about where users are going and how much time they're spending on each place and what are the funnels up from one to the other. And although a lot of companies have groups that are specialized in just this piece of the analytics, we're not necessarily seeing a lot of people that are overly active, especially in the pharma space, with taking those key learnings and performing actions based on it. And the holy grail of that, of course, would be to have this rules engine within the system, so that you're saying, okay, well, the system's learning and it's making decisions, and we're reordering content, and we're choosing which content you get to see based on the types of interactions. We see more movement more rapidly in that type of space. in other industries outside of pharma, but I think that for the most part, when we see these changes happen, they eventually make its way to pharma. So we're seeing that there is going to be increased emphasis on determining what type of content and providing the right content at the right time to the right audience, and it's certainly very important.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's ultimately communicating content to bring about behavioral change for patients and docs within the space. There's an example case study shared just the other day of an interactive prescribing information where it's not just 2-point font on tissue paper, but animations and storytelling. And it's exactly that same sentiment that's got to translate into mobile effectiveness, right? It's got to be reflective of how folks are actually using the medium. If we can switch paces for just a second, talk about the nuts and bolts of this. I'm sure many people in our audience, when you're talking about responsive design for mobile, how does that actually play out in terms of implementation? Complicated, easy? To me, just being in the space, it's conceptually easier, but I'm sure there's a lot of trepidation around it.
Sure, yeah, and so, responsive design is a great starting point, and it's a great tool. There's a lot to think about in this paradigm, though, because what you're talking about is content, be it text or layout or images or videos, and so you've got all of these different types of content that you're having to accommodate, and all the different form factors and layouts you're having to accommodate. And so, if you take just a pure responsive approach, really what you're asking the phone in somebody's hand to do is to take all this content, take all these rules, do all this processing, format for a display, and then hand it off to you. And how many extra seconds does that add to the overall display? So the approach that we have taken is that we've said, well, it is not necessarily cost effective for every company out there to do all of the investigation of what are all the capabilities of every single device in the market, and then how do we account for each and every one of the nuanced differences between them. So we decided, well, we'll build a platform that has the rules engine built into it, that is built on responsive technologies, but we're splitting response between client side and server side. And so that allows us to make a lot of decisions on the server side that then drive the generation of the HTML and other content that goes to the mobile device, so you're actually able to achieve the promises of mobile through responsive design, and you're not having to fall into the pitfalls of the slow load times and the site abandonment and these types of things.
Thanks so much. It's Mark Baker with HipCricket talking about responsive design, talking about optimizing that user experience, and ultimately getting the messaging across for pharma and medical device to our constituents. Fitz with Pixels and Pills, Digital Pharma East, Day 3 Mobile in Philly 2012. Thanks so much, Mark.